Imagine a man who's known for his kindness, his empathy, his willingness to always do the right thing. One day, this same man finds himself doing the unthinkable, cold, calculating, maybe even cruel. What happened? How did the light in him go out? Was he hiding something all along? Or did something change him? Think about it. Why do good people, those we trust, those we love, those who have stood firmly on the side of right, sometimes transform into something they would have feared or condemned? In this video, we'll go deep into the psychological and philosophical mechanisms behind that transformation. We'll uncover the reasons why people with good hearts, good intentions, and moral integrity can end up doing terrible things. And most importantly, we'll reveal what you can do to recognize this slow metamorphosis within others and within yourself. The final reason we explore is perhaps the most disturbing and the most powerful of all, because it's the one no one sees coming. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, comment your thoughts as we go, and share this video with someone you believe is ready for deep reflection. Because what you'll discover here may forever change how you see yourself and the people around you. Let's begin by understanding this uncomfortable truth. Good people don't become monsters overnight. They erode, they fracture, bit by bit, and often they don't even notice it's happening. According to Carl Jung, every individual carries within them a shadow, the unconscious part of the personality that holds our repressed weaknesses, instincts, and desires. For Jung, the failure to recognize this shadow and to integrate it into the conscious self is where the danger lies. The more we deny the darker aspects of our nature, the more likely we are to project them onto others. Or worse, act them out when our defenses are down. This is one of the first steps in the transformation. The person who cannot accept that they are capable of darkness is often the one most controlled by it. But why would someone who is good, someone who follows the rules, who is kind and considerate, fall into this trap? Sometimes it begins with pain and unresolved trauma, a betrayal, a humiliation. Think of the teacher who wanted to inspire but was mocked and beaten down by a system that didn't care. Or the child who grew up craving love, only to be abandoned. These wounds leave marks, and when they're not healed, they metastasize. The desire to never be weak again becomes a thirst for control. The urge to never feel pain becomes a hunger to cause it. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo, known for the infamous Stanford prison experiment, revealed something chilling. Ordinary people, when placed in environments of unchecked power and anonymity, are capable of shocking cruelty. His findings suggest that it's not only about who you are, but also where you are, what role you're given, and whether there are limits to your behavior. So now, ask yourself, how many good people have been thrown into roles, workplaces, relationships, institutions where their values were slowly eroded, their boundaries pushed, until they no longer recognized themselves? We see this in abusive relationships, the loving partner who becomes controlling, the protective parent who becomes suffocating, the loyal friend who becomes possessive. At first, their intentions were pure, but fear twisted them. Fear of loss, fear of betrayal, fear of not being enough. In this fear, they begin to rationalize. I'm just doing this to protect them. They need to learn. It's for their own good. And in that moment, the monster isn't born. It's justified. This is where the transformation begins to accelerate. The moral compass begins to distort, not all at once, but gradually. It starts with bending a rule just this one time. Then comes the small lie, the minor cruelty, the moment where empathy is replaced with indifference, and then forgotten altogether. One of the most tragic things about this descent is that it often comes from a place of idealism. The most dangerous monsters are not those who want to destroy the world, but those who want to fix it at any cost. Historian and political theorist Hannah Arendt warned us of the banality of evil, the quiet, unassuming way that normal people become agents of cruelty, simply by obeying, by conforming, by not thinking deeply enough about the consequences of their actions. So now, reflect on this. How often do we mistake goodness for compliance? How often do we assume someone is good simply because they are agreeable, pleasant, easy to be around? True goodness requires awareness, courage, the ability to see your own flaws and take responsibility for them. It's not about never being angry, never making mistakes, or never having dark thoughts. It's about not letting those things rule you from the shadows. But when someone is praised only for being nice, for being obedient, for doing what others expect, Without being taught how to process their pain, their rage, their fear, they become a ticking time bomb. A person who doesn't know their shadow doesn't recognize when it's taken the wheel. And here's the question for you. Have you ever felt yourself changing? Not in the ways people noticed, but in the ways only you could feel. Have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered, when did I become this version of me? This is not just about others. This is about us. Every one of us has the potential for light and for darkness. The path we walk depends not just on what we believe, but on whether we're willing to confront our own abyss before it stares back too deeply. And this is just the beginning. But here's the uncomfortable part. Sometimes the monster that emerges is not a complete stranger. Sometimes it's a version of ourselves that we secretly admired, the version that doesn't care what others think, the version that doesn't feel pain or guilt, the version that finally has power. We rarely admit it, but power seduces. Even the most noble hearts can be tempted by the illusion of control. The philosopher Lord Acton warned, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But he also added something often forgotten. Great men are almost always bad, men not because they began that way, but because they convinced themselves that their greatness gave them permission to step outside the lines. Think about the hero who becomes the tyrant, the activist who becomes the censor, the healer who becomes the manipulator. All started with good intentions, but they lost their way when they stopped questioning their own motives. This is where righteousness becomes dangerous, when a person believes so strongly in the morality of their cause that they begin to believe the ends always justify the means. If I must lie to protect the truth, so be it. If I must break a few people to save many, it's worth it. In that moment, the person is no longer serving a principle. They are serving their ego, disguised as principle. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote that the greatest danger that of losing oneself can occur very quietly in the world, as if it were nothing at all. That is the quiet slide we're exploring, the subtle shift that turns goodness into its opposite. What makes this transformation even more chilling is how society often rewards it. The one who suppresses emotion is seen as strong. The one who controls others is seen as a leader. The one who buries their pain is seen as mature. And so, we learn to amputate parts of ourselves to fit these ideals. Compassion becomes weakness. Vulnerability becomes shame. Integrity becomes naivety. And then, one day, you meet someone who's always calm, always charming, always in control, and something about them feels off. That's not peace. That's a person who buried their chaos so deep they forgot it's still alive. But not all monsters are created through ego or power. Some are born through silence. Consider the bystander, the person who watches injustice, cruelty, or suffering, but does nothing. Not because they are cruel, but because they are afraid of standing out, afraid of being punished, afraid of facing what it might cost them to do what is right. In psychology, this is called the bystander effect. When the presence of others discourages individuals from intervening in an emergency situation, the more people there are, the less likely anyone is to help. Responsibility is diffused. Conscience is silenced. And here's the frightening part. A good person who looks away long enough becomes desensitized. What once made them uncomfortable becomes tolerable, then normal, then justifiable. Then they don't even notice anymore. This is the slow moral blindness that history has shown us again and again in times of war, in institutions of abuse, in corrupt systems. The line between good and evil isn't just crossed, it fades. And people go along, because going along feels easier than confronting the monster in the room or the one inside themselves. Now let's go deeper still. Have you ever met someone who used to be kind, but life hardened them? Not because they wanted it, but because they felt they had no other choice. The world they felt didn't reward kindness. It punished it, and so they adapted. Piece by piece, they shut parts of themselves down. No one starts off cruel, they just grow tired of being the only one who isn't. This resignation, this surrender to cynicism, is one of the saddest reasons why good people become monsters. But there's another layer. Some people become monsters, not because they wanted power or gave in to fear, but because they were taught that being monstrous was necessary to survive. The child raised in a violent home learns that strength equals dominance. The teenager bullied at school learns that vulnerability is dangerous. The adult in a toxic workplace learns that ethics make you expendable. Over time, they become what they had to become, not to thrive, but just to endure. And when survival is the priority, morality becomes optional. The psychologist Abraham Maslow explained that when a person's basic needs, safety, food, shelter, acceptance, are threatened, they cannot access higher levels of consciousness, such as morality or self-actualization. In other words, it's hard to be good when you're constantly in survival mode. But here's where the danger lies. Even when those survival behaviors become habits, they don't disappear. They calcify. They become identity. The mask becomes the face. And this is when the good person who has been hurt because of the pain starts to hurt others to avoid it. Not out of malice, but out of reflex, out of a belief that this is simply how the world works now. So ask yourself again, is there a part of you that has hardened over time? A part that once hoped, once trusted, once dreamed, but now stays silent? Why? Who taught you that softness was dangerous? This video is not here to point fingers. It's here to hold up a mirror, to help you recognize how easy it is to slip. How easy it is to lose sight of yourself, not because you are evil, but because you stopped checking in with who you are. In the next section, we'll go even deeper. We'll explore how culture, systems, and even family dynamics can breed monsters in disguise, and how some of the most dangerous ones wear the mask of virtue. And then, we'll reveal the most powerful and disturbing reason of all, the one that very few people ever recognize until it's too late. You won't want to miss it. There's a sinister irony in the way some of the worst behaviors emerge not from hatred, but from love. Love twisted, love wounded, love confused with control or obsession. And it often begins inside the home. Family dynamics, where we first learn about trust, safety, and identity, can unknowingly mold a person toward monstrous behavior. Take the parent who demands perfection, not out of cruelty, but out of fear that their child will suffer in a harsh world. Or the sibling who manipulates, believing they are protecting the family. These are not villains in the traditional sense. They are people reacting to fear, shame, and unhealed wounds passed down across generations. Renowned psychiatrist Dr. Gabor argues that trauma is not just what happens to you, but what happens inside you as a result. The child who grows up feeling unseen or unloved often develops patterns to cope: people-pleasing, emotional detachment, hyper-independence. These may look like strength, but they often hide deep fractures in the psyche. And if these patterns go unexamined, they can manifest later as controlling behavior, emotional coldness, or a desperate need for dominance in relationships. The monster here is not screaming, it's silent, it's subtle. It's the slow suffocation of authenticity under layers of inherited dysfunction. Now, expand that same principle to culture and society. We live in systems that reward aggression, celebrate self-interest, and encourage comparison. In such environments, goodness is seen as weakness. People are told to hustle, to win at any cost, to fake it till you make it. And what happens when someone buys into that lie? They begin to wear masks, many masks, one for work, one for family, one for friends. But beneath those masks, something begins to rot. The person forgets who they are without them. Sociologist Irving Goffman describes social life as a performance, each person playing roles, wearing costumes, adjusting their behavior to the setting. But when you perform long enough without pause, the performance becomes your prison. You lose the line between acting and being. This is the breeding ground for the hidden monster, because now you're no longer reacting to pain. You're creating a persona that denies the pain ever existed. And in that denial, the inner wounds fester. Now let's consider a more terrifying layer. Sometimes good people become monsters because they're trying to protect others. That's right, altruism, when distorted, can become monstrous. History is filled with examples of this. Leaders who claim to fight for justice but justify atrocities. Movements that began with noble goals and ended in bloodshed. Religious figures who preached love while instilling fear. How does that happen? Because when someone believes their mission is more important than morality, they stop seeing people as people. They see them as obstacles or tools or statistics. The heart hardens, the conscience dulls, and the monster steps in, wearing the robes of a savior. This is where Hannah Arendt's warning about the banality of evil becomes even more urgent. When evil comes not with a snarl, but with a smile. When cruelty is not committed in rage, but in paperwork, in procedures, in just doing my job. This isn't the dramatic villain. This is the ordinary person following orders, protecting their position, serving the system. And we ask ourselves, what would I have done? We like to think we are different, that we would never fall. But psychologist Stanley Milgram's research paints a darker picture. In his experiments, ordinary people were instructed to administer what they believed were painful electric shocks to others, simply because an authority figure told them to. The vast majority complied not because they were evil, but because they trusted the authority. They didn't want conflict. They felt uncomfortable, but they obeyed. Let that sink in. Most of us are only a few nudges away from crossing lines we swore we never would. So what protects us? What keeps a good person from becoming monstrous? Not purity, not perfection, not never feeling anger or resentment, but the courage to stop and ask, why am I doing this? Whose voice is guiding my actions? What part of me is acting right now? The healed part or the wounded? One philosopher, Michel Foucault, said, where there is power, there is resistance. But the most important resistance is internal. It is the refusal to lie to ourselves, the refusal to justify harm in the name of order or safety or righteousness. And that brings us to something very few people ever realize, perhaps the most disturbing revelation of all. Some people become monsters because it is easier than staying good. Yes, easier. Staying good takes energy. It requires vigilance, empathy, restraint, reflection. And sometimes, when life becomes overwhelming, when the world disappoints you again and again, when doing the right thing brings you nothing but pain, giving in to the darker side can feel like relief. To stop caring, to stop trying, to stop feeling it can be seductive. The monster doesn't always come roaring. Sometimes it whispers. Wouldn't it be easier if you just stopped? And that's when it happens. Not with a scream, not with a bang, but with a shrug. But this isn't where the story ends. In fact, we are only now arriving at the most critical question of all. If we all have the capacity to fall, how do we rise? In the final section of this video, we'll not only answer that question, we'll give you the tools to do it. We'll explore the powerful antidotes to this transformation. We'll discuss how to confront the shadow, how to reclaim the parts of you that you lost along the way, and how to become not just a good person, but a whole one. And that final insight, the one we've been building toward, may just be the key to transforming your entire life. You won't want to miss it. So how do we stop the monster from taking over? The first and most vital truth is this. You cannot heal what you do not acknowledge. You must face the parts of yourself you were taught to fear, to hate, or to hide. That includes your anger, your shame, your envy, your broken dreams, the wounds you buried so deep that even you forgot they were there. Carl Jung taught that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. True goodness is not the absence of darkness. It is the integration of it. It is the choice, every single day, to be aware, to be responsible, and to be human. You are not a monster because you felt rage. You are not lost because you made mistakes. You become lost only when you allow those moments to define you, when you stop questioning, stop feeling, stop caring. To reclaim yourself, you must begin by asking the hard questions. What have I refused to see in myself? Who have I hurt in my silence? Where have I let fear guide my choices instead of love? These questions are not comfortable, but they are the beginning of freedom. Healing starts with responsibility, not punishment, not shame, but the radical courage to say, yes, I did that, but I can choose differently now. Think of Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the horrors of Auschwitz. He wrote that in every moment, we are free to choose our attitude. Even in suffering, even in darkness, he said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. That is the space where the monster is stopped, not through force, not through denial, but through awareness and conscious choice. And now we reach the most powerful insight of all, the one we promised from the beginning. One that is as liberating as it is terrifying. The monster is not your enemy. It is your teacher. Yes, read that again. The darkness within you holds the very lessons your soul needs to grow. The anger shows you where your boundaries were crossed. The jealousy points to where your deepest desires lie. The shame reveals where you still crave love. Even the cruelty you once showed others is not your destiny. It is a signpost. It says, "This is what happens when I abandon myself." The goal is not to destroy the monster, but to listen to it, to understand it, and to guide it back into alignment with your values.